politicians,
Russians,
Mexicans,
yes.
Russians.
Communists.
So you have a real cow on stage?
No, not a real cow, it's an actor in a cow costume.
And he's the cow?
Yes, I am the cow, and the cow is a bit weird.
The cow has a disease.
She's acting a bit strange, like a dog. If someone throws a stick, she fetches it and brings it back, and she can smoke with hoofs and everything.
Great.
And as you see, there's the address. It's in the 2nd district.
Near the Prater, you know the Prater?
Oh, the big Ferris
With the wheel,
wheel.
yes.
Oh, we should go.
Yes, the wheel. Everybody knows the wheel.
Perhaps you can go to the Prater before the play. It starts at 21:30.
21:30?
It's at 9:30.
Oh,
9:30.
Oh, right. Okay, great. Well, what's the name of this play?
It translates as Bring me the horns of Wilmington's cow.
Yeah. I'm Wilmington's cow.
All right.
Great.
Try to be there.
Will you be there?
Yeah, we'll try.
I'm the cow. Goodbye.
This is Peter here with Pure Cinema Pioneers. Today I'm in Vienna in Austria at a bridge where some of you may recognise as it's one of the first kind of few scenes in the Before Sunrise film. The reason why I've come here today is to talk about exactly what that director Richard Linklater was trying to experiment with and kind of trying to explore in the making of that film, which is the poetry of day-to-day life. They mention it in the film in a kind of self-referential kind of way, which is a beautiful thing to watch and take in, and kind of hits you on a subconscious level in a kind of trance-like way. The way these actors are moving and speaking and the ideas that are being put across to you really connects in that kind of holiday vibe, that holiday traveling vibe of, you know, the way that you can just bump into people and start a conversation with them. You know, it starts from nothing and then it builds into something a bit more. Kind of like the only way you would ever experience that is on holiday, traveling. You don't really get that in day-to-day life, you don't really get that at work. But there is obviously poetry in day-to-day life in the work sense. There is poetry in every part of life is uniquely cinematic, or can be. And so you take this simple bridge and you turn it into something which is a whole lot more. You're experimenting with time, you're playing with a kind of rhythm in that sense. And a lot of that is a lot more important than what a lot of people might think this video is about, kitchen sink drama or that kind of kitchen sink atmosphere. And, you know, if you're watching something like This Is England, which is great, you get that knock-on effect from Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, Café Come Home, these old kind of British films, which, you know, were at the forefront of this. You've got the French New Wave, which have brought these ideas, you know, and John Cassavetes, of course, who've brought these ideas of poetry of day-to-day life and, you know, being down on the streets, you know, and talking about things which you would only really get on the streets, as opposed to the kind of the Hollywood photographs of people talking kind of idea. And it's important, you know, Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm come to mind when I'm thinking about this, because these are shows which really want to, you know, make scenes about nothing in a way. And it's a beautiful thing when you're able to do that, because it's truly capturing the truth of life, the real truth of life, not the kind of scene after scene of, and it's easy to plan, where you've got scene after scene of scripted events which are thematically important to a fault. And even when you're trying to write these scenes, and this is what we're going to be talking about, is you're trying to write these scenes and they inevitably end up being these scripted events. And on the other side of the coin, if you just set up a camera and start improvising, yeah, it's a scene maybe about nothing. It's a scene maybe where you've just got people talking about sport, about backgammon, and, you know, nothing really comes of it. What's beautiful is when you're able to combine the two in a kind of rehearsed improvisation way, and you're able to get a kind of poetry of day-to-day life. Remember, these are just tools, and not every Richard Linklater film is that, you know, is using this kind of poetry of day-to-day life as their kind of priority in every single scene. It's important to note that there are scripted scenes, but there is that underlying philosophy running through that's affecting the rhythm, that's affecting the actor's performance, the editing, the composition, the music choice. It's affecting everything. And once you've got the philosophy and become a master of time in that way, you're really then just shooting what you want to. And it's beautiful when you're able to just shoot what you want to and have everything be gold in that way.
Oh, hey, look at that. See that?
Beautiful.
You can't paint that.
Well,
Well, you could, but it'd be a bit rubbish. Probably sell it for about 25 quid in one of the tourist shops around here.
why did you do that, eh? Why? You know, it's physically impossible.
Ah, we're back.
Are you ready to order?
Yes, please. Shall I go first?
Yep.
Could I have the scallops to start, please? And then I'll have the pigeon as the main course.
I will have the rabbit, please, followed by the lamb.
Thank you.
Nice image, rabbit following a lamb.
That's a bit weird, Rob.
I really think This Is England is a great example of a film which is operatic in its nature. This is a Hollywood film, really. It is down to earth. It is absolutely everything that we need in the film industry, because it shows that you can make these real films about real characters and yet still be somehow Hitchcockian, still be somehow real and theatrical, Shakespearean, with your actors. When I say Hitchcockian, I mean cinematic language. I'm not saying that he's doing it in a kind of, Shane Meadows is doing it in a Hitchcockian style of editing or suspense or anything, although there is suspense. What I'm trying to say is that we're making a film here. It doesn't have to be this fly-on-the-wall thing of maybe in Kathy Come Home, or maybe even a Ken Loach film, although I love those type of films. I love Saturday Night, Sunday Morning as well. But these films are kind of, for me, you know, everyone has their own opinion, and for me, they're just not as entertaining as maybe the kind of operatic, you know, you could say I'm shallow or whatever. But for me, it needs a kind of surrealism to be filmic. It needs something cinematic to it, and so I'm glad for a film like This Is England, because it paves the way for different films like, you know, Tyrannosaur, or different films of this nature that is submarine. Basically what we're talking about is films which tell the truth on screen. Any kind of scene can make this happen. Even in a film like After Hours, which is such a kind of dreamlike film, you've got these scenes of absolute truth of character. That's what we're talking about. This topic could even branch onto characters or branch onto truths, anything like that, because they're also interconnected, these ideas of kind of what makes a good film to me. Even a film like Eyes Wide Shut, where you've got that cinematic element throughout the entire film, the atmosphere and, you know, amazing scores and amazing kind of big set pieces in this personal tale between two lovers. There is a very truthful element to the way that the characters talk to each other, the way that the relationships are on screen, and you could say that this is a real couple. I mean, for a start off, they chose a real couple in that film. Stanley Kubrick chose that real couple of Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman in that film for a reason, and that's that they're going to show these truthful scenes to each other. They're going to be able to pluck out this dynamic from each other that maybe a couple that would take a while to get to know each other would actually convey. Same with a film like Good Will Hunting, you know, where you got these real friends acting with each other. This is why it helps to have scenes about elements from your own life, memories that you've had, experiences you draw from yourself. So maybe if I had a memory from when I was younger, I could write an entire scene based on that. Maybe I could build an entire character based on these people, or build an entire scene or kind of idea, belief system, philosophy from that, which is really kind of a whole piano's worth of notes on the film, if you get what I'm saying, rather than maybe just a one note character or something of that small kind of footnote film. It was David Fincher who said recently that his films like Fight Club are a lot more kind of important for society, and because there's a lot of truth to it about the philosophy behind it and the character conversations that they have. Whereas a film like Panic Room, which he said himself that's a thriller. That's a Hitchcockian thriller. I'm sure Hitchcock himself would say that his films like Vertigo are so much more important to society to kind of understand and delve into and realize what exactly is going on there, the subjectivity of it. Whereas a film like North by Northwest or 39 Steps, these are romps in a way. You go on this adventure with them and it's fun, One requires a whole lot more thinking than the other to understand. And you can even dissect a film like 39 Steps and say, what is it really about? But I think it's pretty obvious. It can help you a lot when working with actors to write your scenes in this kind of truthful way in order for them to actually feel like they're going to put their all into this project. If they feel like this is worthy of their time, that they're depicting something real, they might put in a lot more effort knowing it could be quite important. It's not always the case, sure, but you can even get your actors to write on the project, like in Before Sunrise, where you've got the writers kind of attached on all three films, and of course they're going to come back 12 years later. Who wouldn't want to understand this? Or Truffaut bringing back the same actor for each of his films based on, we're trying to make something important here, to understand some kind of psychology about life, and it is more the bee that stings than it is the fly on the wall. It doesn't have to be shot in a documentary style. It doesn't have to be improvised. It doesn't have to be guerrilla filmmaking, run and gun. It can be as Hollywood as you like. But it does kind of help in this kind of, because it does fall into a genre as well. So it helps sometimes to go down that path at first, even if you're going to go a lot more static later, a lot more Hollywood later, cinematic-wise. To come from it from the angle of, I've got all of these cinematic ideas in my maybe growing up film, a film about, a kid who's growing up, coming of age, they call it. To have such cinematic ideas going on before you've actually got the characters, before you've written the script, or you might have some scenes written down. You might have an entire script worth of cinematic scenes, but your character is as dry and flat as fuck, and you're going to go through with the film, and it might be a mistake because you're missing out on a great learning lesson, or to actually delve into the characters with some depth. The depth, you don't have to be the smartest person in the world to discover things about characters. You can discover them just by having some kind of truth from your own life, from your own scenes. The scenes which were most truthful are going to stand out, and maybe you should be working outwards from there rather than designing things to fit in next to each other. It's about the poetry of day-to-day life as well. So the rhythm, that might be the truth of the scene. It might be the truth of the atmosphere of the scene in terms of whatever you think is a realistic depiction of what you're trying to show. And really what we're talking about is a kind of scene about nothing a lot of the time. It can be that kind of Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm way of showing nothing. But what Poetry of Day-to-Day Life is really about is scenes about nothing, the kind of anti-cinema idea, because in cinema we have these scripted events which happen one after the other. Even when we work from character, this can happen, where it feels like we're just doing the best part of a character's life. Or what about when they're on the toilet and nothing much is really happening? Sure, this could be boring, but really it comes down to that singular question: is it boring or not? Is it somehow important? You don't have to be showing nothing deliberately. That will come across as pretentious, and it probably is a little bit, but it is far more effective when you're able to show a character at their kind of most unexpected and vulnerable. Kind of, maybe they're on the toilet, or maybe they're doing the dishes, or maybe they're, playing football with their mates. Is something which is not really isn't followed by a fight breaking out, some kind of conflict or resolution. Yeah, a scene can be interesting, but maybe it's interesting psychologically, for it explains who they are as a person rather than what is actually going to happen in the scene. I think Paul Thomas Anderson is a great example of a director who can do this really effectively, although pretty much all the greats can, but I'm thinking right now about The Master, about Boogie Nights, and There Will Be Blood, and how we're seeing one after the other the character progression, not in a kind of arc of where they begin and where they end, just how these characters change over time in a natural way, in which scene by scene we see a bit more about their psychology, and a bit more about their psychology in relation to other characters' psychology. And therefore, if it is interesting, if it is kind of building to something, now I have to be careful with that, because what is it building it to? When does it not become poetry of day-to-day life? Not that that is the be-all and end-all of making films, but it is more interesting to understand and work on character and psychology in this way than it is to do it the other way, in my opinion, where you come up with an arc for a character. A character has to get from what they did in Breaking Bad, which is, take Mr. Chips and turn him into Scarface, or Better Call Saul, take Jimmy McGill and turn him into Saul Goodman. Just look at The King of Comedy versus My Dinner with Andre, two very different films, but one in which, in The King of Comedy, where we're building from this, fairly kind of inactive fanatic into the kind of Joker figure, of course. You see where I'm pulling parallels there. Before he gets there, you see these scenes which we understand a bit more about his psychology. That you don't have to show a careful kind of steady build, although it is a steady build. We're just understanding from scene to scene his progression, and maybe Jerry Lewis's personality, to balance that out and show the different lives, so that once you understand the life, and this happens in Goodfellas, this happens in After Hours, once you understand the life, Colour and Money, you can see why he would end up there. The Irishman, just all of Scorsese's films, he just ends up there. You see this in Wong Kar-wai's films as well, Wes Anderson's films, Tarantino's. It comes down to showing the life helps you understand how they get there. With My Dinner with Andre, we see one setup, really, a discussion between a guy and his mate over the course of a night, where he tries to convince him of a different life that he might be having. They play on each other's doubts, and they, come to some kind of conclusion. But what kind of film is it? It is more a film that you're not going to get before, and it has its place in cinema as a piece of art form. It's not going to be as well remembered as Goodfellas, but it is there to help your mind kind of have a little bit of peace, and it is a great film. I truly think it's up there with one of the greats. It's a shame that it doesn't get as much recognition, but there are many films like this. Boyhood is one of them, where it's so tied to the gimmick that you can't see the value of each and every scene and how they were produced in the way that they were. Often we see these scenes where it is just a group of lads chatting in a living room, or a couple talking over a table. anything down to earth, poetry of day-to-day life, and we think to ourselves, oh, that was easy, you know, anyone can film that, anyone can, but it, you know, it takes a master to have a few cars flipping over or something. Well, bollocks. You know, what we really want to be seeing is intricate character experiences with each other, and, you know, interesting dynamics that are going on between two people a lot of the time. You know, whether we're talking about the best that Marvel has to offer or the best that Scorsese has to offer. But we're seeing the two extremes. They're both tied to character, and they both have their value for each other. Want to know a good film that has great poetry of day-to-day life? Shawshank Redemption. You can see the real life of these prisoners. Anytime we get to see the real life of someone who we don't feel like we're watching a film, we feel like the film has transported us to a different place and time that we're seeing the truth of. That's what's important. That's what we need to hold on to. I believe you can have poetry of day-to-day life next to a really cinematic scene, next to poetry of day-to-day life on the other side. It's hard to do it in the same scene, although it has been done many times, where you'll have a particularly observational moment, almost down-to-earth moment, followed by something very Hitchcockian, very cinematic language heavy. For example, in Taxi Driver, when he looks in the cup, I know it's an overused example, but it is followed and preceded by scenes of just talking with your mates, co-workers. So even there in that scene, and if you can do it in that scene, you can do it across an entire film multiple times. It's how the best directors work, in my opinion. You can cut straight from one shot of poetry of day-to-day life to a cinematic shot, back to poetry of day-to-day life, back to a cinematic shot, and it can hold that relevance for both of their things which kind of balance each other out in a scene. I think people get very scared when they hear, I want to make a film about nothing, or I don't watch films about nothing, because they think, well, why would you want to do that? I mean, I want to be entertained by a film. I want conflict. I want, you know, high stakes, perhaps. But even lesser than that, just character. And it's like, you shouldn't be scared, because no matter what you do, you're not going to make a film about nothing. Even if you shoot a brick wall, it is of a brick wall. It's of texture. That texture has history. So you're making a film then about history, perhaps, just by having that one shot. So you probably can't do it if you shoot a black screen. You're maybe posing a question about color and light. So what the hell are you doing, you know, saying that I don't want to make a film about nothing? It just depends what's in the frame and what's out of it, what you're showing and what you're not showing on screen. Get your characters in a room and film them. Film them doing whatever. Film them doing your scenarios. Maybe hot seat. Maybe relate it to the topic. This is a radar, a kind of vector graph, perhaps. Is that the right word? Of where these topics lie. And you can pick out maybe one of them and say, I want to fall into that area of filmmaking, of filming these characters in this scene, the more verite style. I want to film more kind of documentary style. I want to film more kind of straight up Hollywood style, or neo-realist, or, you know, French New Wave style of filmmaking. They're all relevant. They're all kind of tied in with each other. There are different ways that you can do it, different, you know, avenues to pursue with your actors, with your crew, with how you set it up. A lot of it's just in how you set up the set, how you kind of talk to your actors, what you do, whether you play music or not, whether things are strict time-wise. It all comes down to these logistical things of how you're going to do it once you've decided what kind of film you're going to make, who your inspirations are, where that comes from, what kind of art are you going to produce, and then how you're going to produce it. You might be focusing on the more tactile elements of a character's life, maybe the terminology of a company, and you might fixate on these ideas that you've done a lot of research on. Well, that's all great as long as all the other elements of your film are working. If you're not using cinematic language, then you might fall flat on your face doing a film, that's just terminology. I mean, imagine Glengarry Glen Ross without the powerful acting or the dynamic cinematic language that's going on. The lighting, the kind of setups, the blocking, perhaps. It all comes down to then the company, and that can be kind of boring, perhaps. Is it like The Big Short, or is it like The Wolf of Wall Street?